Donald Trump, the U.S. president, has openly talked about buying Bitcoin to pay off national debt. Donald Trump is now on record saying, "Maybe we'll pay off our $35 trillion debt. Hand them a little Bitcoin." That one sentence just shook the entire crypto market. But here's where it gets wild, because if you actually run the math on what Trump is talking about, it doesn't just reveal how unrealistic that plan is with Bitcoin, it accidentally points straight to XRP. Let's break this down together, because once you see these numbers, you'll understand why XRP could quietly become the backbone of the new global financial system. Now, before we get into the numbers, I want you to really pay attention. Because if you want to see exactly how the top 1% are positioning for this next crypto shift, I put everything together for you inside the XRP Millionaire Blueprint. It includes the full document, a clean infographic, and a private video breakdown showing how smart money is preparing for what's coming next. You'll find it in the pinned comment below this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, so let's start with Trump's statement. He says the U.S. could pay off $35 trillion in national debt using Bitcoin. That sounds bold, but let's just walk through the math. Let's say the U.S. government somehow decided to buy 1 million Bitcoin. That's 1 million coins out of the 21 million total that will ever exist. At today's price of about $13,000 per Bitcoin, that purchase alone would cost around $13 billion. Now here's the problem. If they wanted to use that Bitcoin to actually pay off the full $35 trillion debt, each of those coins would need to be worth $35 million apiece. You heard that right? $35 million per Bitcoin. That would push Bitcoin's total market cap to over $735 trillion. To put that in perspective, there's only about $50 trillion of fiat currency in the entire world right now. So unless we somehow multiply the world's money supply by 15 times overnight, those numbers just don't add up. Even if every country, company, and person on Earth moved their wealth into Bitcoin, we'd still be far from hitting that valuation. So while the idea of paying off debt with Bitcoin sounds exciting mathematically, it's almost impossible with how the global system is structured right now. But that's exactly where XRP enters the conversation. Because XRP isn't designed to store value like Bitcoin. It's designed to move value. It's built for the next phase of finance, tokenization, instant settlement, and bridging digital assets across every border. And if you look at the way central banks are now testing digital currencies from Europe to Asia to the Middle East, a growing number of those tests are happening on the XRP ledger. That's not speculation. That's documented reality. Let's think about this clearly. The U.S. debt is growing fast, $36 trillion and counting. Paying that off with an asset that has to reach $35 million per coin is unrealistic. But what if the US or any country could use a digital asset that's built for settlement, liquidity, and tokenization? That's XRP's entire purpose. The XRP ledger can move $50 million in just 2 seconds for less than 30. Ripple's early investors have publicly demonstrated it. Now imagine that efficiency applied on a national level, not for a single transfer, but for global banking, central bank transactions, and institutional liquidity. The cost savings alone are staggering. Traditional systems like SSWF can take 1 to 5 days to settle transactions, and the cost can range from $20 to thousands per transfer, depending on intermediaries and networks involved. XRP solves that problem instantly. So let's dive into some math that actually does make sense. XRP has a total supply of 100 billion tokens. About 37 billion are still held by Ripple in escrow, which means they're locked and released over time. Roughly 20 billion are on exchanges, and the rest are in private wallets like yours and mine. That means at any given moment, only a small portion, maybe around 10%, is truly liquid and available for purchase. Now, if you assume a scenario where global tokenized value, things like CBDCs, stablecoins, and digital assets begins to flow onto the XRP ledger, that creates immense demand. Let's say just $50 trillion of value out of the hundreds of trillions in the global markets becomes tokenized and moves across the XRP ledger. If only 10% of XRP's supply is actively circulating, that would imply each XRP could be valued around $8,800. That's the kind of number that is mathematically achievable because tokenized value doesn't require replacing fiat. It simply bridges existing systems more efficiently. Think about that. At $8,800 per token, the total circulating XRP would represent enough liquidity to handle $50 trillion in global settlement value. That's not a far-fetched fantasy. Financial institutions are already working on tokenizing real-world assets like bonds, stocks, real estate, and even commodities. And XRP is one of the few ledgers built to handle that volume at enterprise scale. Now, let's go back to Trump's idea for just a second. If the US government wanted to use XRP instead of Bitcoin, here's how it could look. To pay off $45 trillion in future projected debt, they'd only need 5 billion XRP valued at $8,800 each. That's about $44 trillion in value. Compare that to needing 1 million Bitcoin at $35 million apiece. It's night and day. And here's what's even crazier. The cost to acquire 5 billion XRP right now at today's price of around $3 would only be about $15 billion total. That's less than 1/16 of what it would cost to buy a million Bitcoin today. So, what does this mean? It means that if Trump or any major government genuinely wanted to use crypto to strengthen their financial position, the logical choice isn't Bitcoin. It's XRP. XRP doesn't need a 700 trillion market cap to deliver real-world utility. It just needs adoption. And that's exactly what Ripple has been building toward for years. Ripple's partnerships now include central banks, payment providers, and global financial institutions. They've already worked with entities connected to the Bank of England, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the Central Bank of Bhutan, and more. The technology is already being tested in real-world environments. So, the idea of XRP becoming a key part of international liquidity and settlement isn't just possible, it's already underway. And here's something most people overlook. XRP can serve as the foundation for central bank digital currencies without being the CBDC itself. That means a country can issue its own digital currency on the XRP ledger while leveraging its built-in liquidity and speed. The result: seamless global payments, instant settlement, and massive cost savings across the entire system. Now, imagine that scaling up as major financial institutions begin using XRP for internal liquidity. It's no different than how they hold core equities like Apple or Google stock in their long-term portfolios. Once that XRP is in their reserve, it rarely comes back to the open market. That effectively reduces circulating supply, pushing scarcity and value higher. It's the same mechanism that makes major stocks skyrocket once big funds lock in their positions. This is how the XRP story is unfolding behind the scenes. Every time you see headlines about tokenization, instant settlement, or CBDC interoperability, XRP is sitting quietly in the background, connecting the dots. The infrastructure is already here. The public recognition just hasn't caught up yet. When Trump talks about using Bitcoin to pay off debt, he's hinting at something much bigger without even realizing it. That the world is getting ready for a digital asset-based economy. Governments and institutions are waking up to the idea that value can move faster, cheaper, and with more transparency than ever before. And XRP is sitting at the center of that transformation. Let's talk about the XRP rich list for a moment, because this part is fascinating. Right now, there are just over 100 billion total XRP tokens that will ever exist. And if you own even one XRP, that means you technically own 1/100 billionth of the entire network. That might sound small, but if XRP becomes the bridge currency for the global economy, that tiny slice could represent ownership in the future financial rails of the planet. Think about that. A few dollars could literally represent your stake in the infrastructure of tomorrow's money. Here's where it gets interesting. Ripple, the company behind XRP, still holds about 37 billion tokens in escrow. These tokens are released gradually each month, and Ripple can choose whether to sell them or lock them back up. That system prevents flooding the market and keeps the ecosystem stable. Then you've got exchanges holding roughly 20 billion XRP, meaning that around 20% of the total supply is in places where people can still buy or trade it. The rest, it's sitting in wallets held by long-term believers, people like you, me, and institutional players who understand what's coming. Now, when you add that up, you realize something powerful. Less and less XRP is available to the public. The circulating supply is limited. And as more institutions and central banks adopt XRP for payments, settlement, and liquidity, that available supply could shrink even faster. It's similar to what happens in the stock market. When massive funds like BlackRock CK or Fidelity buy shares and hold them long-term, those shares effectively disappear from circulation, reducing supply and increasing demand pressure on what's left. The same logic applies here. That's why when you hear experts talk about XRP price potential, it's not random numbers thrown around. It's based on real liquidity math. The more value that flows through the XRP ledger, the higher the price of each XRP must rise to handle that volume efficiently. If $50 trillion in tokenized assets ends up using XRP for settlement and only 10% of XRP's total supply is circulating, the math naturally pushes prices into the thousands per coin range. Now, before we move forward, it's important to look at how tokenization is going to accelerate this. Right now, financial giants like BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs are already experimenting with tokenizing real-world assets. What that means is they're taking things like stocks, bonds, real estate, and even debt instruments and representing them digitally on blockchain networks. It's a way to make every asset in the world more liquid, more traceable, and easier to move. Let's use a simple example. Imagine a company owns $1 billion worth of real estate across multiple countries. Traditionally, those assets are locked up. They can't easily be moved, sold, or leveraged. But if those assets are tokenized, they can be divided into digital units that represent ownership. And those tokens can move instantly between institutions, investors, or even governments. Now, multiply that by the entire global market. That's where XRP's design shines because the XRP ledger was built to move those tokens and settle them in seconds. Here's another key point most people overlook. XRP isn't just fast, it's scalable and energy efficient. Unlike Bitcoin, which relies on proof-of-work mining, XRP transactions don't require massive energy consumption. That's why central banks are comfortable experimenting with it. They need efficiency and sustainability, not another system that strains global resources. Ripple has worked for years to make sure their network can handle institutional-grade settlement. That's why you see Ripplet connecting with major banks and payment corridors across continents. Now, let's take a closer look at how banks actually benefit from this transformation. Every single year, global banks move trillions of dollars across borders, and in doing so, they pay massive fees to layers of intermediaries. The current system, dominated by networks like SWF, is reliable, but painfully outdated. Transactions can take 3 to 5 business days to clear, and in that time, exchange rates fluctuate, compliance checks stack up, and operational costs rise. It's a process that bleeds efficiency out of the global financial system. That's exactly where XRP steps in. Ripple's technology enables banks to move money across borders in real time with settlement speeds of just 3 to 5 seconds. The cost, pennies, sometimes even fractions of a cent. Instead of relying on multiple intermediaries to bridge currencies, XRP acts as the universal liquidity layer, instantly converting one asset into another. This doesn't just save time. It unlocks massive cost reductions, improves cash flow management, and allows banks to free up capital that would otherwise sit idle in nostro accounts. In short, XRP eliminates the friction that has plagued global payments for decades, bringing traditional finance into the digital age. Michael Arrington, the founder of TechCrunch, once shared a powerful real-world example that proved just how efficient XRP truly is. He moved over $50 million using XRP, and the entire transaction cost only $30 and settled in just 2 seconds. That's not a theoretical use case or a test run. That's live, high-value capital moving instantly across borders. Now imagine that same level of efficiency scaled up to the world's largest financial institutions. When banks and payment providers start moving hundreds of billions of dollars daily through this same network, the demand for XRP naturally explodes. Every single transfer requires a small amount of XRP as both a bridge asset and a transaction fee, creating continuous utility-driven demand. As transaction volume grows, XRP's value is reinforced by its use, not speculation, turning it into a core component of global liquidity and cross-border finance efficiency. This is why many in the financial world believe XRP is the most practical choice for real-world integration. It's not trying to replace currencies. It's connecting them. That's the secret most people miss. XRP doesn't compete with the dollar, the euro, or the yen. It connects all of them seamlessly, allowing money to move between countries in seconds instead of days. That's why central banks are interested. That's why Ripple's technology has been quietly adopted in pilot programs around the world. Now let's talk about the global picture for a second. Around the world, governments are preparing for the next financial phase, the era of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. These are digital versions of national currencies that operate on blockchain technology. But the question is, what network will connect all of those digital currencies together? Because if every country builds its own digital system, none of them can talk to each other without a bridge. That bridge is what XRP was built to be. The Bank for International Settlements, which oversees many of the world's central banks, has already published research exploring how cross-border central bank digital currencies could connect through private blockchains like XRP and XLM. Ripple has worked directly with central banks in Bhutan and Palau, and they've been in ongoing discussions with others about pilot programs. The foundation is already there. So imagine a world where every country's digital currency can instantly trade, settle, or move value across the XRP ledger. You'd have a completely new form of global liquidity, one that's transparent, instantaneous, and borderless. And unlike the current system, which depends on outdated settlement layers, this new network would be decentralized, trustless, and verifiable in real time. Now think about what that means for XRP's demand. As more central banks, institutions, and corporations start using the network, they'll all need XRP to provide liquidity for transactions. But XRP has a fixed, limited supply. There's only so much available. Every major player that buys and holds XRP for settlement reduces the circulating amount left for everyone else. And when global adoption rises while supply tightens, basic economics take over. Price has to adjust upward to balance demand. It's simple supply and demand, but amplified on a global scale where trillions in value could depend on XRP's liquidity. Let's make this even simpler. Right now, if a global fund like Fidelity, which manages about $17 trillion in assets, decides to allocate just 1% of that into XRP as a long-term liquidity reserve, that's $170 billion flowing in. That alone could drastically shift the market. Now, imagine multiple funds, banks, and nations doing the same. Suddenly, what once sounded impossible, XRP reaching thousands per coin, becomes a direct reflection of how much global value is moving through it. And the timing couldn't be better. The regulatory pressure on Ripple from the SEC is finally easing, clearing the path for institutional adoption. That clarity is what large financial entities were waiting for before moving in aggressively. Once banks are confident in the legal framework, they can deploy billions into using XRP for settlement and liquidity management. Now, remember the Trump clip we talked about earlier? We'll hand them a little Bitcoin and pay off our debt. It's almost poetic because while the idea may have started as a headline, it's sparking real discussions about digital assets in government and finance. And the more those discussions happen, the more the world looks for real solutions. Solutions that are fast, scalable, and globally connected. Bitcoin might lead the headlines, but XRP is built to lead the utility phase. That's the key difference between digital gold and digital liquidity. Bitcoin is amazing as a long-term store of value, but XRP is what actually allows money to move to pay off debts, settle transactions, and connect entire economies. And that's exactly where the world is heading. So when you zoom out, it's clear why the smart money, the institutions, the banks, the global players are quietly getting ready. The infrastructure is almost complete. The rails are being built. The liquidity corridors are opening. And once that switch is flipped, once XRP begins handling even a fraction of the world's tokenized value, the numbers we're talking about start to make sense. This is not financial advice. Over the last year, we've seen Ripple win court cases, secure new licenses, and expand partnerships in regions like the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. These aren't random moves. They're strategic footholds in areas that are already adopting digital currencies. For example, the UAE has been testing blockchain payments between banks. Singapore's MAS is rolling out its Project Guardian for digital asset settlement, and the European Central Bank has begun formalizing its digital euro framework. Ripple is positioned right in the middle of all of that. Now, here's the thing people keep asking. If XRP is so revolutionary, why hasn't the price exploded yet? The answer is simple. Real adoption takes time. What Ripple is. Building changes how money actually moves, and that requires infrastructure, regulation, and partnerships. But once those pieces are all in place, things tend to accelerate very quickly. Let's use a simple analogy. Think about the early days of the internet. For years, it felt like nothing was happening. Slow websites, no clear use cases, a lot of skepticism. Then suddenly, everything clicked. Broadband rolled out, smartphones arrived, and the digital economy exploded overnight. The same pattern is playing out here. Ripple has been laying the groundwork quietly for years, and now that foundation is almost ready to go mainstream. So when you see all these headlines about banks tokenizing assets, governments launching digital currencies, and companies exploring blockchain-based payments, what you're really seeing is the buildup to XRP's big moment, because none of those systems will work efficiently without something that connects them all together. That something is liquidity, and XRP provides exactly that. Now let's talk about value. One more time, because this is where everything ties back to the price potential people keep asking about. Every time money moves through XRP, the system uses a small amount of XRP to complete that transaction. That's called on-demand liquidity. The more value moves, the more XRP gets used, and the more demand builds up naturally. If the system starts processing trillions in transactions daily, then XRP's price must rise to keep up with that liquidity demand. It's basic math. And this is why some of the smartest investors in the world are quietly accumulating. They're not chasing quick flips. They're positioning for what happens when the financial system upgrades to digital rails. If XRP becomes the bridge for global settlements, even a small allocation could turn into something massive over time. Now, here's what's really exciting. This transformation isn't decades away. It's already happening in small pockets all over the world. From Japan's SBI Group to Latin American payment corridors, XRP is already being used to settle real transactions. Every successful test, every new partnership, every corridor that goes live brings the network closer to scale. And once the market sees it in full motion, when banks start publicly using XRP for large-scale settlements, the perception flips instantly. That's when retail catches up, when media attention floods in, and when prices start to reflect utility. The pieces are aligning. The infrastructure is nearly ready. And if you've been paying attention, you can see that this shift isn't something that might happen. It's something that's already in motion. The same way the internet quietly reshaped communication before anyone realized it. XRP is quietly reshaping global finance right now. We're moving toward a world where the old systems, slow, expensive, and outdated, are replaced with instant digital borderless networks. The rails of money are changing, and XRP is one of the only assets designed to handle that kind of global flow. So whether it's paying off debt, moving cross-border liquidity, or connecting central bank digital currencies, XRP stands ready. And the ones who understand that early, who see the bigger picture, are the ones who will be in the best position when the full system goes live. And if you want to understand exactly how to position yourself for that next phase, how the top 1% are positioning for this next major financial shift, you can get all of that inside the XRP Millionaire Blueprint link in the pinned comment below.